Hello students, I am Dr. Saliha Jamal, Faculty Department of Geography from Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. So let us talk today about the climate change, whether it is real or fake. The views of the two groups of scientists, and this view will be examined by certain evidences and arguments. Here you can find this is the part 2 because in part 1 we talked about that climate change is real, it is not fake. So all the evidences and the arguments which supports that climate change is real, we have talked in previous lecture, or that is part 1. So today's lecture, that is part 2 regarding the climate change is real or fake, that will view, analyze the another perspective that climate change is exaggerated. It is overstated statement. So let us start the class, students. Welcome to today's class. So here we are going to talk about the skeptical view of group 2 that climate change is exaggerated. It is not the real, it is just the natural variability of the Earth's climate system. Try to understand that this view argues that the scientists which supports this perspective, they argue that climate change is not real, it is exaggerated fact, it is just the natural variability in the climate system of the earth which is continuing from past till present. So let us elaborate this opinion. Almost we have said in previous lecture that more than 97% of the scientists are of the view that climate change is real, but few percentage, almost less than 3%, have the minority opinion that climate change is not real. A small group of scientists argues that the role of human activity in climate change is overstated. But in previous lecture we talked about where the climate change is real, and it was said it is mainly anthropogenic derived. All the drivers which are leading to the climate change are mostly the anthropogenic causes. But this view which says that climate change is just the natural variability of the Earth's climate system talks about that the role of human activity in climate change is just overstated. And if we talk and they support this view and says that it is just the natural cycle. The change of climate that we are seeing from the few decades is just the natural cycle. They claim that climate change is the part of Earth's natural variability, citing the historical periods. They used to cite to support their view that through the historical periods of warming and cooling, Earth has seen even the period of warming and cooling. If we see historically, for example, medieval warm period, little ice age, means Earth has already observed the warming period, then cooling period, then again warming period. It means it is just the natural cycle of the Earth system. They criticize this skeptical view that climate change is overrated, overstated. They criticize the data and models which supports climate change. They say that climate models are mainly not accurate, they have less predictive capabilities. They questioned about the climate models for their accuracy and predictive capabilities. Many of these scientists argue that the temperature records are mostly incomplete and they are manipulated according to the set narrative that climate change is continuing. The arguments of this group is based on the historical climate variations that Earth has experienced a significant climate change long before even industrialization, and attributed these climate change historical climate changes may be attributed to the volcanic activity, solar radiations, etc. Maybe due to the rise in the solar flares, sunspots, there may be the warming phase. So, this historical climate variation, by citing the historical climate variations, they argue that global warming is not a new thing, it is just a part of the natural cycle of the earth. If you examine here the global temperature, we are talking about the blue dots talk about the annual average and the red line talks about the 5-year average. We see there was dip, rise, dip, rise, dip, rise. There is constantly dip and rise in the global temperature. But overall, one thing that should not be neglected, that climate is rising if we compare it from the previous decades, or even we can say before 900. If we compare it consistently, climate is temperature is rising. That cannot be neglected. Even the scientist which supports the group that climate change is not real, they say the human impact on the global temperature is very much minimal as compared to the natural drivers. Mainly this climate change is economic and politically motivated, they say. They suggest that the climate alarmism, they call that exaggerated view of the climate change as climate alarmism. So, climate alarmism may be driven by the funding incentives or political agendas rather than the pure science. They say there may be some personal interest regarding the funding intensive to receive funding incentives, or maybe there may be some political agendas. We are not going to discuss it here, political agendas rather than the pure science. And the prominent voices that supports this group is like climatologists, geologists, meteorologists. They have some skeptical view about the extent of the human caused climate change. The humans may not be regarded as much as responsible like the view in which we have said that climate change is real and it is mainly derived by the anthropogenic activities. Groups like Non-Governmental International Panel of Climate Change, that is NIPCC, they often counter the IPCC findings. Means there are two groups here. We can say International Panel on Climate Change, which supports about the view that climate change is real, while there is NIPCC. Many times NIPCC, which is Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change, counters the IPCC findings. So, there are views from some of the climatologists, geologists, meteorologists and the institutions like NIPCC, which counters the findings of the climate change. Let us talk about some of the arguments against the consensus that climate change is real, which supports the view that climate change is not real. If we see the historical fluctuation in the temperature pattern, the climate skeptics argue that Earth's climate has always undergone natural cycles. Earth has observed ice ages and interglacial periods. There were ice ages, means cooling period, interglacial period, even the period there is warming period, medieval warm period that existed from 900 to 1300 AD. And even there is a little ice age cooling period, means 1300 to 1850. So, this group of scientists say that it is just the natural cycle that the earth has observed. As always, the cooling period, warming period, cooling period and again warming period. They claim that current warming trend could be the part of a similar natural fluctuation. As they support this natural variability in the climate systems occurs due to the natural causes, these are the natural drivers like solar activity. There may be the variations in the sun's energy, mainly output are cited as a potential driver of warming. For example, during the sun flares, during the sunspots, the heating capability of the sun increases. So there may be the variations in the sun energy. Even the skeptics point to the periods of increased solar activity which can be correlated with the warming climate. Even the natural driver like volcanic eruptions, if we talk about the large volcanic eruptions which releases large amount of aerosols which even can have temporarily cooling effect, but these scientists are skeptics and they argue that they might also influence long-term trends. Even the critics of climate models, they say that uncertainty in prediction exists. Climate models mainly rely on assumptions. We know the models rely on assumptions about the future emission, what will be the rate of emission in the future, and it also dependent upon the feedback mechanism. So the skeptics argue that these models often many times they overestimate warming. If we see, there are limited historical data, mainly the data are received from the ice cores, tree rings, and these are what we can say indirect source of data. So actually the climate models, climate data are cannot which is not very much we can say received in continuation. Mainly the historical data is missing, and when the skeptics talk about, there is a lot of data manipulations and these allegations of a bias in data collection and analysis to fit a narrative. They say the climate data analysis is mainly based on the manipulations. They are manipulated, pre-assumed that climate change is real, it is continuing. So in order to set this narrative, climate data is manipulated, and examples include dispute over the adjustment to historical temperature records. So these are the few critics regarding the climate data and the model. Even the skeptics talk about the misinterpretation of data in the climate debate. There was a period, if we talk about the warming pause, that is 1998 to 2012, that the skeptics point out during this period of 1998 to 2012, slowdown in global temperature rise have been observed, which is evidence against the long-term warming. The reality is what? Short-term variability. This type of short-term variability, which is known as pause in the warming phase, is mainly caused by the natural factors, maybe the El Nino, maybe the La Nina cycles, which mask the underlying trend of the warming. So we cannot consider this as a major event. It is just the short-term variability, and it is mainly caused by the natural events El Nino and La Nina. It is a type of current. There are confusion between the weather and climate, but we have already talked about that weather is short-term changes, even hourly changes, day-to-day changes in elements of the weather or climate can be said as weather. But when we talk about the climate, it is a long-term changes where the accumulation and average of almost 30 years are being considered for the elements of the climate. Many times some skeptics sometimes used isolated cold events like harsh winters to cushion global warming. That sometime we face different part of the earth face harsh winter. Then these skeptics talks about if it is the global warming, then why this harsh winter is taking place. But what's the reality? Weather is just a short-term change and climate is a long-term average. So this can be regarded as just the weather. Many times cherry picking data have been observed, like selecting a specific time frames or data sets in order to fit a pre-assumed narrative, like highlighting a cooling period without considering the full data set, which shows a warming trend. So this is all we can say. This is a cherry picking data. Importance of this context: data needs to be interpreted in context of broader patterns, not isolated anomalies. Suppose if you see somewhere that is temperature is rising, so we may not see the anomaly why there is this temperature, then again there is decrease. So we may not just see or highlight the anomaly that exists, but we have to talk in more broader term by analyzing the full data set, which points out that warming is consistently continuing. So data needs to be interpreted in context of broader patterns, not isolated anomalies. Let us observe here the surface air temperature anomaly of 2023. The reference period is from 1991 to 2020. Here you can find the anomaly. You can see these are the regions which are mainly regarded higher latitude region. These are the regions, those are regarded as having low temperature. But if we talk about in average rise in temperature, not overall temperature, students, we are talking here average rise in temperature, global rise in temperature, you can find that most of these region at higher latitude which generally have the low temperature, the average rise in temperature in these regions are more as compared to the low latitude regions. So there are surface air temperature anomaly which can be clearly observed from this picture. Even the skeptics are of view that climate change is real. This is mainly motivated by the funding agencies. The bias in the climate research funding have been observed. The critics argue that funding agencies, they are prioritizing the research already confirming that climate change is occurring and is continuing. They generally sideline the alternative perspective to which we are talking about, and they counter that scientific funding is typically should be merit based. It should emphasize evidence and rigorous methodologies. So already the biased funding have been observed according to the skeptic group. Even it is also influenced by the oil and the gas industries. Significant funding has been traced mainly to the fossil fuel company. They are being funded to support the climate change skepticism. So this is also one of the argument you can quote here. Conflict of interest. The skeptics claim that environmental organization and the green industries, they benefit if they promote climate alarmism. Means again there is biased funding. On the other hand, fossil fuel industries, they face economic incentives in order to downplay the climate concern. So sort of there is conflict of interest between the environmental organization, green industries, even the industries of fossil fuel industries. You can see a lot of conflict of interest. There should be the transparency in funding, like peer-reviewed research often discloses the funding sources, adding more transparency in findings. But the studies funded by the industries like tobacco, fossil fuels, they have historically shown biases favoring those industries. So there should be transparency in fundings. These critics talks about the role of politics in climate science. They have already said there may be some economic or political motivated argument that climate change is real. But the skeptics who talk about that climate change is just the natural variability of Earth's climate system. So they say that this narrative is influenced by the political ideologies, political belief often shape the opinion of the climate change in their own interest. Like conservative group may emphasize on economic cost of mitigation, while liberal group advocate for urgent action. So they are mainly influenced by the political ideologies. And if we see, a climate change is a polarized issue. In many of the countries, climate change debates are divided along the political lines. For example, in US, political parties have various views about the government's role in addressing climate change. Sometimes they ratify to COPs, Conference of Parties. Sometimes they withdrew their name from the Conference of Parties. So they are of different views how to address the climate change. See, through this diagram map the countries that joined the Paris Climate Agreement, that's COP15. Out of so many countries here, only 146 countries ratified about all the agendas of the Paris Agreement. Means only these are the countries who ratified, we can say, about the agendas, while only 48 countries signed that they will follow, they will apply all the objectives of Paris Climate Agreement. Only 48 countries, while in red color, most, we can say, part of Canada, we can say US, they even do not sign. And if they sign for some period like US, they withdrew after some time. So there is a great we can say differences. These countries have differing views, even particularly the US. It has a differing views about the government role in addressing climate change. Even because of the policy and regulation disputes, role of international politics, like skeptic argue that proposed climate policies harm economic growth. Major example here we can quote about the US. US withdrew its name. The major reason behind that it will impact, signing or ratifying to the Paris Agreement will impact their economic growth, because it has a differential responsibility, because according to the COP's, Conference of Parties, it was decided that the major contributors to the climate change, the major polluters, are the developed countries. So they have to take leading responsibility in order to mitigate with the climate change. So supporters stress the long-term economic and environmental benefits of the mitigation efforts. Disputes over the responsibilities, which I am talking about, that the developed and the developing countries, which even the Paris Agreement talks about, which was highlighted, this differential responsibility was highlighted in Kyoto Protocol, COP, that is in 1997. But in that the binding targets were set for the developed countries, how much emissions they are allowed. But Paris Agreement, it is little bit diluted, but differential responsibility was stated, because the developed countries are the major polluters. So they have to come forward, they have to take lead responsibility in order to mitigate the climate change. So there was dispute regarding this differential responsibility. Even the debate and technological support for climate over the financial and technological support was also arised, because these COPs talked about rising $100 billion US dollar in order to help or finance the developing nation, to include them in the process of mitigation with the climate change. Even the misinformation campaigns can be quoted like lobbying by the industries, particularly the fossil fuels, to downplay the climate risks, efforts to discredit the scientific findings for political and economic gains. This type of misinformation campaigns were also observed. So we have viewed through the previous lecture and in this lecture the two perspectives, that one perspective favors that climate change is real and it is the major perspective favored by more than 97% of the scientists, while a minority opinion was of the view that the climate change is overstated, overrated, it is just the natural variability of the climate system of the earth. But both these views share some common grounds. Let us talk about that. Even among the skeptics, they acknowledge that uncertainties regarding the specific long or short-term climate impacts have been observed. That's why both these groups agree that Earth's climate have been always dynamic. Means the supporting group is also agreeing, and even the non-supporting group agrees with that the climate of the earth have always been dynamic. Even both these group agrees on the need for the sustainability. Regardless of their stance, all the scientists support the effort to reduce pollution, promote renewable energy and use resources more sustainably in order to protect the habitat, biodiversity and overall ecosystem. These are the shared goal of both these groups. Even both these groups focus on adaptation and mitigation aspect. They talk about recognizing the value of preparing for potential changes in weather patterns and natural disaster. They even both these groups talk about investing and building the resilient infrastructure and technology benefits society regardless of the debates. So, for the good causes, both of these groups, they agree. They even say science as a continuous process. Both sides agree on the importance of continuing the research in order to understand the Earth's climatic system in more clear and in more better way. Openness should be there, revisiting the conclusion based on the new robust evidences should be the fundamental scientific principle of the researches. So both of these group, they have the consensus that the research on climate change should continue. This is one of the public opinion about the causes of the climate change. Just I wanted to show here from sources from the Yale program on climate change communication. Students, if you analyze, it is a very interesting public opinion where the blue color, here you can say, these are the, we can say, most of the top 10 greenhouse gas emitters, the survey. The blue color, here we are talking about dark blue color, caused by the humans. Causes of the climate change is anthropogenic, that is the blue color. Light blue color shows here about equally by humans and the natural, means both. The causes are both for the light blue color here, and the orange color shows caused mostly by the natural changes, means there are a specific group who supports that causes are just the natural, not the human derived. And red color deny that the climate is changing. So there is a minority opinion that you can see in the red color who denies that climate is changing. They directly deny it. So these are the few of the opinion. The major opinion is the climate change is real and it is mostly caused by the humans. There is another opinion, we can say a diplomatic opinion or diplomacy holding opinion. The climate change is continuing, it's consistent and the causes are both, whether the human or we can say anthropogenic derived. And there is a group which also says that climate change is occurring only due to the natural causes. But there is a minor group who are of the opinion that no climate change. They deny that the climate is changing. So we have talked here about both the perspective, student, that climate change is real, one perspective, and another perspective, the climate change is an exaggerated and overestimated rated fact. So that's all for today's lecture, student. Have a nice day. Thank you.